The Minnesota Vikings keep getting sent cornerbacks and safeties in NFL mock drafts, but there's one position you should be keeping an eye on that almost nobody talks about. The Minnesota Vikings don't have a dire need in the NFL draft, and that's exactly how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah wants it. If you don't have a dire need, it allows you to play the market, and that's what the NFL draft is. It's a giant market, and some people have better selections than others, but you have to make the most of what you got. And the best way to do that is to not pigeonhole yourself to need any singular thing. The Vikings have done that better this year than they have in the past, and a lot of that has to do with the salary cap flexibility that they had. A lot of the NFL mock drafters are sending the Vikings cornerback, safety. Heck, 50% of the picks coming in recently are at safety. But it's one position that they're not being sent much at all that you should really keep an eye on, and that is wide receiver. Across 501 mock drafts that I've collected since January 1st. So it's a large pool of data. And this data has been really good at being predictive. 2003, Jordan Addison was second among 535 mock drafts. J.J. McCarthy was first among 838. And Dallas Turner was seventh. So the consensus really does understand a little bit about the Minnesota Vikings. What's really interesting here is if they go a completely different direction. And it's one that they've done a couple times before in somewhat recent history. Wide receiver. Vikings selected Randy Moss in 1998 when they did not need a receiver, having two 1,000-yard receivers. And they had done it in back-to-back seasons, Chris Carter and Jake Reed. And then 2009, receiver was kind of a need, but there were other positions where you could argue more, cornerback being one of them. You could argue defensive line. You could argue maybe offensive line, considering where some of the strengths and weaknesses were and like where they needed youth. They picked wide receiver. And those players elevated the offense to the point where they made the NFC Championship game. Sure, they lost by 3 in overtime both years, but we're not going to focus on that part. We're going to focus on getting that far, and that's what this team is trying to do. They're trying to get that far and then surpass it. So why does wide receiver have to do with anything? Well, Jalen Naylor is about to enter the final year of his contract, and he's okay. Very serviceable player. You like having him on the roster, but how much do you want to count on that guy? And you have Jordan Addison, where right now, it's hard to know what you're going to get long-term with him because you have the DUI arrest still looming over his head. They just had another pretrial conference last week, and he might miss games next year. So where does that leave the Vikings? Well, they could take Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, who has a lot of similarities to Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson. Now, he is not quite the prospect that either one of those guys were, but let me tell you, he's incredibly solid. I mean this in the best way possible. Emeka Egbuka is boring. He does all the little things right. He does all the dirty work. He runs smooth, crisp routes. He gets good separation. He catches the football really well with ease. And he does the Cooper Kupp thing, which is why the Rams were able to set themselves apart with 11 personnel, meaning 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 running back. You don't have that extra beefy blocker. It's because he could block. Not just the effort was there, but the skill. He could do it. He could block like a tight end, and that elevated that offense because now you have a wide receiver who can block like a tight end, and guess what? They're running great receiver routes, so it gives you versatility and flexibility to do a lot of different things. Egbuka gives you that. He can play outside. He can play in the slot. They even ran some leak plays where, you don't know those plays where the tight end gets wide open down the field? It's usually leak where they kind of are on one side and they kind of sneak over on the other side and run up the sidelines. They ran that a lot with Egbuka at Ohio State, and he was getting wide open because he's able to hide in the trenches a little bit. Easier to hide when you're a 200-pound receiver than a 250-pound tight end. Look, I'm not saying it's the guaranteed pick. I'm not even saying it's 100% what I would do. But if you got a guy like Egbuka in here who can do a little bit of everything, that can elevate this Minnesota Vikings offense to another level. And that is something we would absolutely love. Even Odie, he's getting excited about it. I'm Tyler Forness with A to Z Sports. Skol Vikings.